Well, welcome everyone to this first episode in our mini-series exploring the changing world of work in 2025. We're going to look at some of the strategies employers can use to stay ahead of some pretty big changes that are coming down the track. I am Jess. I'm an employment lawyer and PSL working at the team here in VWV.
Hi there, I'm Sarah. I'm an HR consultant and we help employers to implement those changes on the ground. Over the next 4 episodes, we're going to be exploring how employers can build workplace resilience in a way that's legally sound and compliant, but also commercially smart and sustainable for them in the longer term.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to just dive into that concept of workplace resilience. And, it's a word that you hear a lot, but let's talk about what it really means in practice.
So I suppose at its heart, resilience is really the ability to adapt and thrive despite challenges that come your way. And in the current climate for employers, it isn't just about surviving and getting through those sort of economic uncertainties that we all know are hitting businesses really hard at the moment. And it also shouldn't just be about navigating the legal reforms. Really, in terms of being really resilient, it's about looking at those moments as opportunities also to think about your culture and your strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. As we all know, the employment landscape is continually evolving, and at the moment, I'd say that is the case now more than really ever before. So from new laws, and we've got obviously the Employment Rights Bill coming down the track, to also commercial pressures and the economic challenges that those bring. There's lots and lots of challenges that employers are facing that really require much more than just quick fixes. So employers really need to have a proactive mindset, and resilience is going to help organisations absorb shocks and learn and obviously come out stronger at the other end.
Yeah, so it becomes less about how to kind of survive and weather the storm. It's more about being prepared so that when these things come your way, which they always will, you've got policies in place that are going to support you. Yes, you've got a solid grasp of your legal obligations, but you've got the kind of culture within your workplace that can kind of flex and adjust and just more resolutely kind of deal with these things that when they come your way. So I think where we're both getting to here, Jess, is that resilience goes beyond just kind of dealing with the latest issue or crisis or piece of legislation, and kind of goes into this space of, okay, well, how can we be prepared? Yes, we need policies to underpin what we do. We need a grasp of our legal obligations. Where we really want to get to is having a workplace culture that can flex and adjust when needed. If we're thinking about the current economic climate and how we might be resilient in dealing with those kind of pressures, where an employer might go first of all is to think about, okay, well, does this mean budget cuts? Or does this mean doing more with less? But I suppose what we try to advocate for is kind of more than that. It's about really doing a deep dive into how well your business can adapt to change, keep its workforce engaged, and think about planning for the future.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Sarah. And I think, if you take an example of recent increase in employer national insurance contributions, for example, or indeed national minimum wage increases, obviously for a lot of clients, that's going to mean tighter budgets and rising costs and managing those really carefully. But I think what you're saying is, resilience goes further than that, in fact.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes that kind of mindset of cost cutting and budget cuts is quite short-termist. And actually, let's think about how to keep your current workforce really motivated, really committed. Engagement, I think, matters more than ever. not just for morale, but for retaining your top talent, reducing disputes, and really having a culture whereby if you do need to make changes and adapt, that change can really land well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a real link between all of this and the sort of strategy that underpins the approach that an organisation takes when it comes to being resilient. So whether the organisation is investing in training or adopting new technologies or redesigning roles to meet, change in demands over time. I think the point we're making here is that a resilient employer isn't just weathering change, but is really trying to turn change into, an opportunity to improve and to gain competitive advantage.
Yeah, and a good example of what's coming down the line is the Employment Rights Bill, and we've talked a lot as lawyers and HR consultants about the fact that this is going to be a massive shift in the current landscape for employers. And once it comes into force, it's going to reshape a huge number of workplace rights and is really going to impact on how employers handle some of those kind of key processes like flexible working requests, the management of 0 hours workers, and this whole fire and rehire concept that we've been used to will go. And really, now is the time where the savvy employer will get ahead of that change. And that's resilient, right? So that is getting ahead of what's coming down the line, understanding what those likely changes are going to be, and start weaving them into your day-to-day operations early would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I mean, in terms of the Employment Rights Bill, lots of the changes in that bill are being trailed as taking effect no earlier than autumn 26, for example, in the case of the day one unfair dismissal rights. But I think to be a truly resilient employer, don't put off engaging with what's coming down the track and think about now how you can be proactive and meet those changes head on. So that in the case of day one unfair dismissal rights, that might be something to do with how you manage your recruitment, how you manage your probationary periods, what processes you follow to ensure a fairness in terms of any dismissals and so on. So really, I suppose the message is not to bury heads in sand around what's coming down the track.
Yeah, really take the time to be thoughtful about it and try to unpick, okay, well, this is perhaps the legal minimum. This is our kind of bottom line requirement that we need to comply with. But actually, let's think about that and think about whether there are anything that we would like to do to perhaps do a little bit more than that legal minimum, and think about, for us as an organisation, are there other things that we can do to, yes, make sure we're compliant with the legal framework? Of course, that's what all employers should be seeking to do and must do. But also, are there extra things that we can do to really think about our workforce, modern working life for our workforce, and is there more that we'd like to do as an employer to go kind of above and beyond the sort of legal minimum, if you like?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know that your team has been doing a lot in the space of, effective consultation recently, and I'm sure you'll tell us more about that as these podcasts progress. And, effective consultation in terms of going above the bare minimum and, getting it right is going to be important, more than ever once the Employment Rights Bill is passed and comes in, under the bill. So if you talk about collective redundancy consultation, the bill contains provisions that would double the maximum protective award that you as an employee can be ordered to pay if you fail to meet your obligations to collectively consult. And that maximum protective award at the moment is 90 days of uncapped pay per affected employee. and the bill's going to double that to make it 180 days. So, you've got a real financial incentive as well to get things right first time. On top of that, lots of our listeners will be well aware that we've got a statutory code of practice in place that we've had in place for a little while now on dismissal and re-engagement. Well, from January this year, the ability to increase compensation by up to 25% where there's been an unreasonable failure to follow that statutory code, that's also applying to the protective awards. So again, those protective awards, which can be really, really costly and which employers really try hard to avoid, risk becoming more expensive than ever. So, I think all this is to say that early and effective consultation really is a key part of any sort of legally resilient change strategy.
I would totally agree. We've seen consultations over the years where they just don't connect with the workforce, and that the sort of early stage consultation hasn't felt human enough or kind enough, or hasn't really just enabled the workforce to really get to grips with what's happening. And that just sets such a negative tone for the whole process. And once you've kind of set off on the wrong foot, it can be really, really difficult to bring that back and have a process that goes well and has everybody feeling that they've been really listened to and that their views are being taken on board. It just breeds that kind of mistrust that can permeate through the whole thing. And on a slightly sort of different subject, thinking about hybrid and flexible working expectations, I touched on it earlier, but we've seen big changes since the pandemic, really, around how people want to work, and those aren't going anywhere. Hybrid and flexible working expectations are absolutely here to stay, particularly amongst younger workers. And that is a real opportunity for employers. I mean, those who really get on board and embrace genuine flexibility are just going to be much better placed to recruit and retain top talent, particularly where there's a squeeze on budgets and you haven't necessarily got the flexibility to be, offering rates that kind of go beyond what your competitors might be doing.
So let's bring some of that together then, shall we, Sarah? So, I think what we've probably both experienced is that consultation often is seen as a legal tick box exercise that you just have to get through. But I think, if I'm understanding the points you're making correctly, if it's something that's done well, then it's actually really is one of the most powerful tools that employers have got for building resilience during periods of change.
Your staff will be watching how you manage the change process, and it's important to really spend the time thinking about how you communicate change, and your line manager is going to be key players in that process because they're often the first point of contact for employees during change. And so the way they communicate makes a big difference. And in that bit of the whole consultation exercise, really think about making sure your managers are well supported and have the necessary skill set to really work through that process in a valuable way. Because what we sometimes see is managers who are fearful, whether that's a fear of doing something that doesn't comply with the law and making a misstep there, or whether they're concerned about having those difficult conversations that could have implications and consequences for them further down the line. They can be under quite a bit of pressure. And what we see is that their communication can become perhaps a bit defensive. They can come across as being vague because they don't want to commit or say something wrong, or overly cautious. And that has the effect often of eroding trust and ultimately making it harder to then move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, I think that's right. But, also the good news of course, is that all of this can be anticipated and managed in a proactive way. So with the right training and support in place, managers can become really confident communicators and really help a consultation along. You can use them to help explain the reasons for change. Hopefully you've been able to get them on board with the business case or the strategy beforehand, and that equips them then with the skills to explain what's happening in a way that's empathetic and clear and easy to understand. And ultimately that's going to help build trust and smooth transitions, which can be really hard for people. And all of this is going to help create a culture where resilience can really sort of take root.
Yeah, I think my kind of overall thought would be that really resilience starts with being in the right mindset. It's not about, as we said before, it's not about just weathering the storm. It's about being prepared for the storm and planning ahead, engaging people honestly so that you can, adapt and change well. So you're not just reacting to what comes next, but you're ready for it. You've thought about it, you've planned for it.
Yeah.
And you can move forward positively.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this day and age, it's a given that we are about to go a huge amount of legal change in the employment law world. And we're meeting economic challenges along the way, aren't we? So if all of that is a given, then I think what we can take from this is the organisations that are really going to thrive are going to be those who see it coming and meet it all head on with confidence and compassion towards staff.
In our next podcast, we're going to talk about some more of the kind of practical steps employers can take to build resilience in their business day to day.
See you soon.